When you think of Brazil, what comes to mind? Probably incredible biodiversity, right? The Amazon rainforest, sprawling wetlands. But, hidden among all that beauty, there are much, much smaller creatures that pose a really big threat to public health. And we're talking about venomous arthropods.
So let me ask you, what do you think is the most dangerous bug in Brazil? Your mind probably jumps to a huge, scary-looking spider, or maybe a scorpion hiding in a dark corner. Well, hold on, because the answer is a lot more complicated, and honestly, way more surprising than you might think. Let's get into it. To get a sense of just how big this issue is, just look at this number. On average, Brazil sees more than 145,000 cases of envenomation from arthropods every single year. And these aren't just little annoyances. This is a major public health issue. So here's what we're going to cover. We'll look at which critters are causing all the trouble. We'll figure out who's the most common and who's the most deadly. We'll map out where all this is happening, see who's getting stung, and finally, why this is a growing problem.
Okay, first things first. Let's meet the main players in this story. And these aren't just any old bugs you'd find in the backyard. We're talking about animals of real medical importance, whose stings and bites are actually tracked by the National Health System. The main culprits really fall into four big groups. You've got scorpions, especially from the Titius genus. Then spiders, like the infamous Brazilian wandering spider and the brown recluse. Of course, there are bees and wasps, and, believe it or not, even some caterpillars are on this list.
Okay, so with those four groups in the running, who do you think is responsible for most of the attacks? Well, the data gives us a really clear answer.
And what's wild here is just how much one group dominates. Scorpions. They account for a whopping 67% of all envenomations. That's literally 2 out of every 3 incidents. Spiders are a distant second, then bees and caterpillars. So, case closed, right? Scorpions are the most dangerous.
Well, not so fast. Because when we talk about what's dangerous, the number of stings is only half the story. The other half, the part that really matters, is lethality.
Now, if you look at the total number of deaths, yes, scorpions are at the top of the list. They cause over 60% of all fatalities, which makes sense because they sting the most people. But what happens when we ask a different question? Which creature's sting is the most likely to actually kill you? And this is the big reveal, the twist in our story. When you actually compare the number of deaths to the number of stings, the most lethal arthropod in Brazil, per incident, is the common bee. Let's look at the actual numbers. For every 1,000 bee stings that get reported, about 3.1 of them end in death. Now compare that to scorpions, that's only 1 death for every 1,000 stings. The reason for this isn't that bee venom is more powerful, it's because of severe allergic reactions, which can lead to anaphylactic shock. So here's the bottom line, you're much more likely to be stung by a scorpion, but a bee sting actually carries a higher risk of being fatal.
So, we know what the biggest dangers are, but in a country as huge and diverse as Brazil, the story isn't the same everywhere. Turns out, where you are changes everything. Take the Northeast region, which is often hot and dry. It's overwhelmingly a scorpion problem. Here, they're responsible for almost 88% of all incidents. You could call it the scorpion capital of Brazil.
But if you travel all the way down to the cooler, more subtropical south, the picture completely flips. It's a whole different world. Down there, spiders are the main issue, causing nearly 3/4 of all envenomations. And scorpions, so dominant up north, but they barely even make a dent down south, at just 9%.
All right, so we've covered the what and the where, but the data also gives us some pretty fascinating clues about who is getting stung and when these encounters are most likely to happen.
Pretty much across the board, it's working-age adults, people between 20 and 59 who are the most affected. For spider and bee stings, it's more often men, which probably has to do with more exposure from working outdoors. But here's a really interesting detail. For scorpions, women are actually affected slightly more often. This could be because some scorpion species are just really good at adapting to city life, leading to more stings right in and around the home.
And as you might expect, there's a really clear seasonal pattern. The number of stings goes way up during the warmer, wetter months of spring and summer. Then there's a big drop all over the country during the coldest winter month, July. And that just makes sense, right? Arthropods are way less active when it's cold.
So what's the big picture here? When you pull all these different threads of data together, you start to see a very clear and honestly a pretty concerning trend. This is not a problem that's standing still.
The research is really clear on this. Over the last dozen years or so, both the total number of envenomations and the number of deaths from them have been climbing. Now, part of this could be better reporting, but it also strongly suggests a real increase in human arthropod encounters.
And as the researchers themselves point out, this upward trend really highlights an urgent need. We need to get better at studying these venoms, and maybe most importantly, we have to improve the antivenoms and treatments we use for the victims.
And all of this incredible work, which lets us understand this complex issue with so much detail, was led by the researcher Alessandra Matavel and her team at the Fundación Ezequiel Diaz in Brazil. They analyzed over a decade of public health data to bring us these insights.
Which leaves us with a really critical question for the future. We've seen how some of these animals, especially scorpions, are thriving in our cities. So, as our urban areas keep expanding and pushing into natural habitats, how are we going to manage this hidden, everyday conflict? It's something that's only going to become more urgent.